Hey guys, CG here. In this lesson, we're gonna learn LUT. Find more information on educational project by CG on cgbandit.com. Alright, let's start the lesson. The scene contains just 2 armchairs. I also prepared this render using Corona Gamma script. So what is LUT? It's a tool that allows you to use a complexity of prepared beforehand tools for post-processing. You can conveniently use LUT in frame buffer. For example, using LUT opacity, we have to choose from a variety of presets. These presets were made from various algorithms of tools in Photoshop. This is a list of tools that you can set for LUT and use later. But in the end, all you really work with is default Photoshop tools. There's the raw render. This is the kind of render you get by default. You will understand how do the shadow and light work, how do shaders work, having high contrast. We use extreme contrast because Corona itself doesn't always have the contrast that Photoshop has. For illustration, let's review exposure tool in Photoshop. Exposure, offset, and gamma correction are the settings for exposure tool. For example, there's some image we need to improve. Here the action of tools is visible. You can tweak settings and see every step. Frame buffer is not so visual, so to speak. Thanks to LUT, you can save all the algorithms, all the history of your work in Photoshop. And upload the algorithm to 3D Max. Let's test some presets. I think we have here only presets that work mainly with colors and tones. Tone stands for contrast, from black to white. And color stays for saturation. There could be many shades of green, from acid neon green to this type of almost gray olive green. So LUT is just a mix of various combinations of different tools from Photoshop, prepared beforehand for rendering in 3D Max. You can use LUT as an alternative for increasing contrast. First, I use Gamma script with built-in contrast settings. This is crucial to get a deep gradient from darkest to lightest tones. In my beginner's course, I explain how to work with that correctly. Now we have some deep black collapses and overexposure in the picture, but it's okay. At this point, it's enough for us to learn. After using the script, the image got higher in contrast. Of course, we had to increase exposure to compensate light spots. Look how light is the image with Gamma 2.2, and Gamma 1.0 is dark. So we have to compensate increasing exposure. You can also use preset that I prepared earlier. It's called CG Gamma 1. I upload it. And let's return to script 2.2. As you can see, this LUT has Photoshop setting in it that I prepared earlier. Here you can see screenshot of 3D Max when I used Gamma 1.2 and I got pretty contrast image. Then we switch to next layer, layer 1, that overlaps the previous layer. Further, we use LUT here. Tick the checkbox, LUT applies to the image. We get the same exact result in contrast. But one of them is achieved with LUT, another one with Gamma. To achieve this result, first tweak the opacity while watching render. Opacity is translucency, in other words. So opacity is identical to overlay mode to Photoshop. Here's the opacity slider. Let's do a screenshot. Go to Photoshop, make a new file pressing Ctrl N. Paste the screenshot, Ctrl V. And apply Exposure tool. In Exposure, there's a Gamma slider, which has different numbers, but works pretty much the same as Gamma script in 3D Max. Gamma script works in frame buffer. Gamma tool works in Photoshop. Both tools are different, but work the same. For illustration, I use Mask. Use Rectangle Mark tool. Select this area. And apply Exposure tool. Now we have a mask that works with this area. Press Alt and left mouse button on selected layer. There we see the mask. Now the Exposure tool works with this mask only. While watching this image, I'm changing Gamma in Photoshop. This action is identical to using this script in 3D Max. Watch Gamma 2.2 lowering to Gamma 1.2. In Photoshop, things work the same. This algorithm of working with exposure in Photoshop goes to 3D Max as LUT. The LUT file is in cube format. If you untick the LUT checkbox, the LUT wouldn't work. Opacity 1 equals 100%, so 0.1 equals 10%, 0.2 is 20%, and etc. So this work with opacity slider in 3D Max is identical to the work with opacity in Photoshop, when one layer overlaps another layer. We can change layer using opacity and using gamma contrast. How do these numbers correspond in Photoshop and in 3D Max? 0.55 is identical to 1.2 in the script. How do these two algorithms differ? Not much. The main thing is the same outcome. For example, the default corona gamma is 2.2. Let's use script corona gamma 1.2. Take a screenshot, paste it to Photoshop as a new file, let's grab a screenshot with a script, so we know that this image is a script result. I rename it as Corona Gamma 1.2. Next, let's go back to default Gamma 2.2. Activate LUT to get the same result. This LUT was made with exposure tool in Photoshop. But gamma correction in exposure tool was changed to 0.55. As you can see, the exposure hasn't changed. Use Gamma LUT. Now we have Gamma 2.2, but we also use LUT. Now I grab a screenshot, put it in different layer in Photoshop, rename it as Corona Gamma 2.2 plus LUT. Now let's overlap layers and compare the image. As you can see, the image doesn't change, but the settings do. Settings are different. If you have difficulties using or installing script, please use my LUT instead. You can download LUT from this lesson, change the opacity if you want, and apply it to your render. Now let's learn how to make LUT CG Gamma 1. First, we need to apply the exposure tool and set gamma to 0.55. Let's create new file. Any size will do. We must have a background with a lock icon. Apply exposure to the background. And for illustration, I will do Gamma 2.2 and grab a screenshot. I set Gamma to 0.55. Keep the mask white here. What is Gamma responsible for? We made our LUT by applying Gamma. Background layer is Corona Frame Buffer. We apply to this layer exposure tool. When we paste the screenshot and put it under the exposure layer, the exposure tool works for screenshot. Now, how to save your LUT? Before you save, please change mode to 32 bits channel and click Don't Flatten. I'll tell you the difference between 8 bits and 32 bits in another lesson. However, change of bits is crucial before saving the LUT. Now to save it, press File, Export, Color Lookup Tables. So let's put the quality to 90, choose High Quality. Choose Cube Format. So this was the way to make the script Corona Gamma LUT CG Bandit. Now try to open the new script. Let the frame buffer to load. That's it. We got freshly made working script. You see, the LUT works every second I move the camera. If we added few tools more to this LUT, curves for example, we could still effortlessly export it to 3D Max. But what do we use LUT for, really? And is it helpful at all? I personally think that using LUT isn't the best way to work. Maybe only using it for adding contrast to the image. For spotting the shadows, for example, using Gamma 2.2, you can clearly see shadows, but it's mainly because we have white background. And because of one big light. But when you use Gamma 2.2, having various lights and windows in the room, you'll have trouble spotting shadows, seeing the volume of the object. Also, you have to work with shaders. You have to set diffuse. I'm talking about all the extremities of your settings in Corona Frame Buffer. So when you try to make voluminous picture from flat, having trouble with shades and tones, that's when LUT becomes helpful, when we apply contrast beforehand. Talking about other tools, for example, curves. You can prepare LUT with curves before rendering, but you will face one problem, that every single frame will look different. That's because every single frame differs in interior design, geometry, concept, etc. So every frame demands adaptive approach. That's why I think LUT is almost useless, although you can use it as an alternative to Corona Gamma script. Post-processing always demands adaptive approach. Also, you cannot make complex algorithms in LUT. Also, I forgot to say that you can use LUT in Photoshop too. For example, we decreased gamma, and want to use LUT. Click Color Lookup. Here we need to upload the LUT. So we put in this tool our LUT. We can use as many algorithms as we need. But I still think that LUT is useless, because post-processing should always be individual for every frame. The alternative for LUT is Gamma script. You can use any of those. I also don't advise to use these Corona Render default LUTs. They confuse you. Only maybe if you have very little time for your current project and you need fast result, maybe use presets. But if you need professional result, you need to give it time, energy, and effort. Thank you for watching. See you in the next lesson.